So welcome everyone to this is the 19th report on the state of the nation, and we're focusing on health, so it's really all about the health of the nation. Before we begin, let's have a quick snapshot as we always do. So consumer confidence in Australia is at 105.1, business confidence is at 108.1, so both of those are above 100, but Australia is nowhere near as confident as our Asian neighbours. The ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index, so we're partnering with ANZ to survey consumer confidence around Asia, is showing Australia well behind all of the countries that we survey. So we're well behind Indonesia, whose confidence is 157.6. We're well behind China at 147, and well below even New Zealand at 131. So that's where we are in terms of confidence. Unemployment at 10.6% of the workforce is far too high. That means we have 2.5 million Australians unemployed or underemployed. But what we can see is that the unemployment figures here really started to kick up around 2008 after the global financial crisis, and then again in 2012. And you can see that the Roy Morgan figure at 10.6% is much higher than the government stats that come from the ABS. The other important point is that unemployment is much higher among young people. Young people are always hardest hit when it comes to unemployment. And today you've got about 17% of people under the age of 30 who are in the workforce who are looking for work. They're unemployed. That's a big number. Voting intention in terms of political party support, we've actually got the Liberal National Government at 42.5%. So our government now has minority support, and the Labor Party's at 57.5%. And confidence in the government is 95.5 points. So 100's the midpoint, so they're well below that magical 100, which means that more people think the country's going in the wrong direction than think the country's going in the right direction. And economic conditions or economic issues continue to be the thing that worries Australians most. So 42% of Australians say something about the economy, economic conditions, economic problems, interest rates, unemployment, the federal budget, cost of living. All of those sorts of bundle of economic issues is the thing that is top of mind for Australians when we ask them in this open-ended way, what's the most important problem facing Australia? And you can see here that's the black line, that economic issues have been important, continue to be important, and they're well ahead of our concerns about social issues, human rights, and even politics and leadership. So these are things we hear about all the time. They're sort of on the news and things, and yet when it comes to what Australians say, we're looking at the world through this very strong economic lens. In terms then of society, broad demographic and social trends, with something like 7.6 million Australians aged 50 and over, and 3.4 million Australians aged 65 plus, we're not only a growing population, we're definitely an ageing population. So we can see here the growth trajectory, so the population just continues to grow in number. And we also see that the population is ageing from this chart. And essentially that ageing of the 65 plus group is pitched to increase its rate of growth as the baby boomer group move into that 65 plus age group. At the moment there's 2 or 3 years of baby boomers in that 65 plus age group. As the baby boomer bump moves in there, we'll get an escalation of people over the age of 65. So that's a really crucial part of this whole ageing population discussion. Marriage is now officially in the minority. So in our survey data that we've been tracking, 50,000 interviews a year for years and years and years and years, we now see that only 48% of the Australian population aged 14 plus are married. So it's in the minority. Obviously we've got more de facto relationships and more people who are in that other category, divorced, separated, widowed, etc. And about 2 in 3 people live in a household with no children. So we see this changing nature of the fabric of society as it relates to family and marriage. We continue to be increasingly open-minded and socially progressive. And this trend is fairly solid. Again, when you're looking at numbers like 50,000 interviews a year, when you see a trend that just continues to make its way up, you know that you've got this continually increasingly open-minded and progressive thing happening. And that manifests itself in such things as, 58% of people now support homosexual couples being able to adopt children. And an increasing number of people, it's just over 40% now, believing that computers and technology give them more control over their lives. So these sort of psychosocial things and technology things are the things that are manifest from this open-mindedness that we're seeing in Australia. We're also seeing a real growth in what might be called the food and cafe culture. So there's more television programs and magazines than ever before dedicated to food, cooking, nutrition, all of these sorts of things. It seems to be one of the biggest, I don't want to call it a fad, it might be a movement like the women's movement, but it's a really big issue at the moment. We're pretty focused on food. And yet our attitudes to food are confused. There's nothing I can do with this slide to make sense of it. It's essentially a bunch of fads. Sometimes you've got things that are a trend. We're doing more of this or we're doing less of that. Our food attitudes are kind of all over the place. And I think that is reflected in some of the things we'll see in a little while about being overweight. Fruit and vegetable consumption is still trending down. And there looked like there was some improvement going on there around 2009, 2010. We had campaigns about eating fresh food and vegetables and things, but it does seem to be on a downward spiral. Alcohol consumption continues to decline in Australia. The only form of alcohol that's showing an increase is cider. So if you've got young people in your life, that will resonate. Now, we've been tracking some metrics relevant to health for 30 years or more. And that's things like smoking, and we're seeing smoking continues to decline in Australia. Let me just say, Gary mentioned a little bit about history. One of the interesting things about Roy Morgan is that this decision to study issues like smoking happened a long time ago, and we really have Roy Morgan to thank for that. Roy, not the man, not the company. Roy was an anti-smoker, and he agreed, though, to measure cigarette usage for the tobacco companies on the basis that the same data was made available for the anti-smoking lobby. Just think about that. To us at Roy Morgan who work here, it's blindingly obvious. It's become a core value of the company. You measure things accurately and that data should be available to everyone. At the time, he had to fight a big battle. In America, there is no single database on smoking. The cigarette companies have one database showing that cigarette smoking is going down like that. The anti-smoking lobby have another database showing that it's flat or increasing in certain areas. So there's huge debate about what's the incidence. So in Australia, because of Roy's stand on this, and the same for alcohol and a whole range of other areas, hang on, I have to show my technical prowess here. Oh, somebody else has done it for me. Is that you, Marcus, doing that? Okay, because of Roy's decision to make sure that we had this core data, for a lot of these measures, we're looking at the numbers that both sides or all sides of an argument will actually take notice of. Back to the story, smoking is on the decline, just like alcohol consumption. And here are the kind of trends that you can actually see fairly clearly. The other thing we see is in terms of activities. Organised sport is in decline. That's things where you have to get together and join a group and play an organised sport. But exercise, going to the gym and formal exercise is actually on the increase. And you can see that from the chart, increase in these activities that are sort of really to do with fitness and health. The other thing that is increasing is what you might call e-activity or online activity. So there's a whole lot more of that going on. In terms of medical things, since about 2007, we piloted before that, but since about 2007, as part of our single source survey, this survey that interviews 1,000 people a week, 50,000 people a year, another 50,000 next year, etc., every week we collect data on some 250 illnesses, problems or medical conditions. And this, I have to say, was a really brave move for a research company. The health field has its own language. It has its own science. It has its own kind of ways of doing things and a whole bunch of secrets. So in a way, a research company is very brave to trespass into this space. But what we felt is when we looked at the existing data, it wasn't giving a big enough overall picture. And we'd been invited to do some research on things like breast cancer for Sue Davis. And we were tracking women who'd got breast cancer and found over time, you know, they would have the treatment and they'd be okay, but a whole bunch of other medical conditions kicked in. And there really wasn't the sort of data that would help understand the relationships between illnesses or the relationships that existed between various kinds of illnesses, problems, and exercise or nutrition or any of those things. So we set about collecting this data, and that's what we've done. We're now able to sort of profile the different kinds of people, their activities and the relationships. So let me just go through. This is not a detailed analysis of any one of these issues. There are large numbers of Australians that have all sorts of health problems. And as you'll see as we go through these things, many of them are actually modifiable by things that you might call lifestyle factors. So we see here 13.2 million Australians have problems with bones, joints or muscles, and that includes things like common problems like back pain that's experienced by some 39% of the population, through to things like scoliosis and muscular dystrophy, a whole range of things that bundle up to be problems with bones, joints and muscles. But look at the number, 13.2 million. 13.1 million have colds, flu or allergies. 10.5 million Australians have ear, nose or throat problems in the last 12 months or an average 12 months. 9.3 million have digestive system problems in the last 12 months. 8.9 million Australians had problems with their lungs or breathing in the last 12 months. 8.6 million had problems with skin, hair or nails in the last 12 months. 6.4 million had mental health problems in the last 12 months. Big number for mental health problems. We'll come back and look at that in a minute. 5.7 million had mouth or teeth problems in the last 12 months. It's one of the few areas actually that sort of dental and mouth and teeth problem that's in fact decreasing. So there's been some positive action going on there. 5.1 million have heart or circulation problems. 4.8 million have reproductive problems in a 12-month period. 4.6 million had brain or nervous system problems in the last 12 months. 4 million had problems with their eyes or vision in the last 12 months. 3.2 million Australians had problems with infection. 2.5 million blood-related problems. 2.2 million diabetes or other endocrine system problems. 2.1 million had kidney and urinary system problems. 1.4 million Australians had some form of cancer in the last 12 months. 1.2 had behavioural problems. I always think that's like my dog, but it's actually binge drinking, binge eating, bulimia or anorexia. So, there's a number of things to think about here. Really big numbers, millions of people with these kinds of problems. I think the average is about 11 problems per person, illnesses or problems or conditions, whatever it is. And some of them are sort of minor annoyances, some of them are very life-threatening things. But this is a major set of issues that need to be understood in terms of the health of the nation. And of that, something like almost 250 problems or diseases tracked, just over a third have shown any improvement since about 2007. We also ask people, as well as asking the kind of problems or illnesses they have, we also ask them how they're feeling. We ask them, do they agree or disagree with the statement that I'm feeling well and in good health? So that's a pretty straightforward question. And we have 81% of Australians saying, yep, I agree. I'm feeling well and in good health. So despite the average 11 illnesses, or despite all of those millions of people who've got problems, most of us actually feel pretty good. And when we look at the kind of illnesses or problems that people have, we see that some things really make people feel very unwell. So, 17% of people disagree. So they're essentially saying, I don't feel well and in good health, I feel unwell. But if you've got chronic fatigue syndrome, you're going to feel unwell. 62% of those people say they don't feel well and in good health. If you've got lung disease, 55% of people will say they don't feel well and in good health. So a range of these different illnesses or conditions can create, a real serious feeling of unwellness. And even something like obesity, 42% of people who are obese say that they don't feel well and in good health. So these illnesses and diseases make a difference to the way that we actually feel. So what does all of that mean? We've got some things looking good, some things looking bad. How do you weight it? What does it really mean? Is Australia getting better or worse? Or, how do we think about this? Health is clearly a multifaceted issue and it's complicated. And I think that's one of the big things that I've learned over the last little while as I've been, making my way through all of these illnesses, activities and that sort of stuff. It's complicated. But in 2012, Roy Morgan Research partnered with Alere and in particular a chap called Dr. John Lang. And they and we reviewed all of the literature on health, and there's lots of it, and looked at all of the available data sources that we could actually get our hands on and analysed our own data and basically developed what we call a measure of wellness. And the Wellness Index, as we call it, I'll talk about it in a minute, but this was designed to be able to enable us to track things over time to say, are we overall getting better or worse, and which groups have, good things and bad things. So we really needed that, and I don't want to be critical of the medical data that's available because I don't think that our data replaces medical data that's available. It definitely doesn't. What it does is it provides a butte framework to look across people, across illnesses. But when we looked for that big picture from the current medical data or health data that was available, it really seemed quite patchy and inadequate. So quite often the data was outdated. So the things that we'd learned were sometimes things that were based on information that would be 3 years, 5 years, even 10 years old. Major studies are very expensive, so often our learnings are quite outdated. It's often delayed. We do a lot at Roy Morgan Research, we do a lot of government research, and we find that for instance, the biggest study, Household Income Labour Dynamics Australia, HILDA, is now reporting data from 2011 on unemployment. The data's absolutely well and truly analysed, carefully checked and validated, but the world's moved on. So a lot of the health data is it's late by the time that we get to see it. And often it's not really detailed. It'll be yes or no, do you smoke or not how many cigarettes. So there are lots of areas where there was just this sort of dearth of information. And so much money spent on health, isn't it? The government spends an enormous amount of money, and rightly so, but government initiatives are basically designed to affect change. And without solid, ongoing data, it's really next to impossible to actually see whether the change has worked, whether it's made a difference, whether it's made a lasting difference. So we really felt it was worthwhile sticking our neck out and going into this territory. So here's what we did. We basically start with a national survey. So we don't start with people who have cancer and try and understand them. It's a national population sample. We survey everybody to find out all of the illnesses that they have, all of the activities that they do, etc. We create a massive database. And then we look for the right questions to help us understand what we'll see in a minute, the sub-indices of different levels of health, different kinds of health. Weight them all appropriately, and the weighting factors are based on the weight or the importance they have in terms of people's sense of well-being. There's a huge amount of science behind this, but it's too detailed for this presentation. But believe me, we all went cross-eyed doing it. Essentially, at the end of all of that science and analysis and things like that, we came up with 7 sub-indices, and I think they make a lot of sense. So you have these key areas of nutrition, a nutrition index, activity, psychology, smoking, alcohol, medical, and BMI or weight. So these 7 sub-indices were created to enable us to understand wellness. All the indices are designed to be positively related to wellness. And they all have these different factors. So alcohol has 3 factors, the amount and type, of alcohol that you consume and whether it's short or long-term consumption. Smoking has one factor, daily number of cigarettes smoked. There's 53 medical factors, and with the body mass index, it's just about weight and height. And when it comes to exercise and activity, we have the frequency, intensity of various kinds of exercise, formal and informal. And psychological well-being, we have 5 different factors. And in nutritional health, you have eating good things like fresh fruit and vegetables, which is positive, and negative things like fast food, soft drinks, and other indulgences. So as we move forward, it's kind of important that we keep this in our mind. It's important that some of these indices are actually reversed. So smoking health, the health of the nation in terms of smoking, is the inverse of the number of cigarettes. So the more smoking you do, the less well you are in terms of the smoking health. Alcohol's the same. The more you drink, the less well you are or the less well-being you have on this health index. Even within nutrition, you get positive sort of brownie points or scores for eating fresh fruit and vegetables, and you lose points for fast food and the other indulgences. So we have to keep that in mind. Overall, when we roll all these 7 indices or sub-indices together, we see that the wellness of Australia is improving. And so here's the Alere Wellness Index, powered by Roy Morgan Research with all of our data in it. It was designed to start at 100 when we began with our data in 2007. And you can see that it's sort of gradually crept up and it's now at 101.47. Doesn't seem like a big increase. Believe me, anything in the positive sense is good. So overall, we're improving. But the wellness of the nation is patchy. We actually have not everyone being equally well, and there are some worrying signs in the drivers of wellness or those sub-indices. If we just look at the big index, we see that wellness is correlated with where people live, age, socioeconomic status, and gender to a small degree. So people in capital cities fare better on the wellness index than those in country areas. So your capital cities here in brown and your country areas in green. Capital cities, more well. Men fare better than women. How unfair is that? And if you look at age, essentially wellness decreases with age quite consistently until you hit 65, and then it starts to improve for those people still left at that age. And you have, in terms of socioeconomic status, the more affluent, the ABs, the top end of the socioeconomic status, have a higher level of wellness. Wellness decreases with a decline in socioeconomic status. That's a broad brush picture. And this is just kind of interesting. We look here at the relationship between the wellness index, and that's the dark bars, and whether people tell us they're feeling well and in good health. Remember that 81%? And overall, you have to say the picture is one of quite a solid level of correlation. Kind of hangs together, which gives us comfort that we're measuring something that matters. But there were some interesting outliers. The young and those in the lowest socioeconomic status fare better on the wellness index than their own reported feelings of health. So young people are actually weller than they feel. That makes sense for me and my kids. And we have people in the lower socioeconomic status doing the same sort of thing. So there's a lot of correlation, but you also have a sense of feeling rather than actual kind of changes. We now look at these different indices, and remember they're all designed to be positive measures of health. So fewer Australians smoking means that smoking health is improving. Similarly for alcohol. And indeed, of these 5 indices, you can see most of them are improving. So the nation's health in terms of smoking, improving. The nation's health in terms of alcohol consumption, improving. The nation's health in terms of nutrition, improving. Activity levels, improving. Medical health, even improving. The 2 big ones that are on the decline are body mass index, and that doesn't mean we're getting thinner, we're actually getting fatter. So our body mass index health as a nation is in decline, and our psychological health is also in decline. So every sub-index has a story. I'm going to give you a little bit on each one. There's not enough time to look into each of them, but they all do tell different stories. And then we want to focus on the 2 that are really causing problems for Australia. So first of all, if we look at nutrition, The federal government's campaign Go for 2 and 5 recommends 2 serves of fruit and 5 serves of vegetables per day. But we see in fact that less than 5% of Australians meet that requirement, and only teenagers and those aged 65 plus actually exceed that national average. So when it comes to nutrition, if we look at this snapshot across the sort of demographic breakdown, you see women marginally healthier than men in terms of nutrition, and that we see that nutritional health improves strongly after the age of 50. So you can see that age group thing, and after the age of 50, people are just generally eating better. And socioeconomic status, interestingly enough, has very little correlation, except we see right at the bottom end it's reasonably good, but it's not the sort of correlation that I would have expected. And I think there's a couple of things going on. You've got eating fruit and vegetables, which is a positive thing, and then you've got eating fast food and other things. And consumption of fast food is correlated to both things like age, and the more money you have. If you have got no money, you can't afford fast food. If you've got a lot of money, you know not to eat too much fast food. So it's one of those strange sorts of variables. Overall, it's not coming out with the clear pattern in terms of socioeconomic status. In terms of activity, men score more healthily than do women, and we see activity health actually improves with age up until about 50, when it drops away sharply. And socioeconomic status is a very strong correlate. So the top AB group are a lot more active than the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. On the alcohol health sub-index, women are substantially more healthy, drinking less than men. Alcohol consumption increases with age, so the health decreases. And we also see that alcohol health is lowest among the highest socioeconomic group. The top end of society drinks too much. No surprises there. Medical health is higher in the city than in the country. We've seen this coming through our data before, and it's better among men than women. Not surprisingly, medical health actually decreases with age, and there's some evidence of poorer health, lower health in the lower socioeconomic groups. Now, when we come to body mass index, how about this number? 180,000 tonnes overweight. So if we just take the people who are overweight and obese and multiply it by how much they're overweight, or in terms of kilos or tonnes, 180,000 tonnes overweight, and gaining some 5,000 tonnes per year. These are big numbers. So over 11 million Australians now overweight by an average of 16.5 kilograms. And we see the trends here, but essentially now the majority of Australians, 61% of Australians, are either overweight or obese. That over the obese line, the blue line there, continues to increase, and the number who are actually overweight but not obese is held sort of steady. We look at a snapshot of the population. Overall, women are healthier than men on this sub-index. However, while there's fewer women in that overweight and obese category, when women are overweight and obese, they are that by more kilograms. So they tend to be more overweight once they get to that stage. So in fact, women contribute equally with men to that 180,000 tonnes overweight. Young people are healthier on this index. So being overweight happens as you get older. And so some of the issues around the increasing problems with overweight and obesity for Australia are related to our ageing population. There's no question, but that's not the whole story. And we also see in terms of the socioeconomic status, the more affluent the ABs are healthier. So overweight is more a problem among the lower socioeconomic groups. Now we look a little bit more at obesity and BMI and overweight because it is one of those things that's trending in the wrong direction for the health of the nation. And what we find is it's one of those things that really makes people feel unwell. You know, happy, jolly, fat people, it's not sort of something that the data's supporting. When we look at this chart, we're actually comparing it to, remember we had 81% of the population saying they feel well and in good health. So if you're of an acceptable weight, then your 87% of those people actually say they feel well and in good health. As it slides down, if you're a little bit overweight, your sense of being well and in good health goes down a little bit. And by the time you're in that group of very severe obesity, only about half the people feel well and in good health. So being overweight, moving into obesity, actually does seem to have a very strong impact on how people feel, the way that they feel, whether they're well and in good health. And how does this compare to smoking? I was going to leave that as a surprise, but I pushed the button too soon. I would have thought that people who smoke a whole lot would actually be feeling much less well. The data actually doesn't support that. It shows that smoking, in fact, has less of an effect on your feeling of health and well-being than does obesity. That's the red line. And what about fast food consumption? How does that correlate with being overweight or obese? Well, the answer is differentially by age. 5 to 9 visits to a fast food place or a quick service restaurant in a month increases the likelihood of somebody, a young person, someone under 25, being overweight or obese by 2%. So it doesn't make much difference if you're under 25, but by the time you get to 65 and over, 5 to 9 fast food or quick service restaurant visits, it's 1 or 2 visits a week, is likely to have a 10% likelihood of your being obese or overweight. So it makes a difference. The older you get, the more it's a problem for you. On the other hand, 10 or more visits to a quick service restaurant or fast food place makes a difference to everyone. So even young people under 25, if you're taking too much fast food, 10 or more visits a month, you've got an 11% chance that you'll be overweight or obese. So you see these things, this is just one area where we started to explore it, and you see they operate quite differentially by age and amounts and things like that. Now let's look at what I think is probably the most important area of our the health of this nation, and that is the increasing mental health problems that we're seeing. So what is driving this sharp decline in psychological health that we've seen since 2007? Well, first of all, if we look at the sort of demographic profile, we see that psychological health, the good side of it, correlates with gender, age, and socioeconomic status. So women fare better than men. Women fare worse than men. Men always win these battles. It just doesn't seem right. Women fare worse in these psychological health stakes. Younger people fare worse than older people, and those in the lower socioeconomic status groups fare worse than the people in the higher end. So it's a pretty stark, clear picture. And again, you've actually got capital cities a little more performing a little better on this score than others. So that's a sort of snapshot. But what's driving the change? The real driver is an increase in anxiety. So we see some of the other things. Stress is a big number. So you've actually got 24% of the population reporting experiencing stress in a 12-month period, up from about 23. It's a real change, but as I said, there's big numbers of sample here. This is not a fluctuation due to sampling. You've got things like panic attacks going up, but the really big change is coming from anxiety, which has come from 9% in 2007 up to nearly 16% now. Big change. And we also see, if we look at young people, it's about 1 in 5 young people report experiencing anxiety in a year. This increasing anxiety is actually mirroring increasing unemployment and underemployment. This is not just our hobby horse, this is reality. If we look at a line of unemployment or underemployment, 11% through to 19%, you see the trends are both in the same direction. We also see the increase occurring from about 2012. We see the shape of those lines increased. The shape of the increase got steeper. So from about 2012, they both started to pick up. Now, lest anyone thinks, well, that's an interesting coincidence, because a lot of data that you show a couple of lines, it can be sheer coincidence or it can be something else driving it. When we look at our data, we see that people who are unemployed or underemployed, that means they've got a part-time job and they really need a full-time job or they want more hours, those people are 62% more likely to experience anxiety than those people who are fully employed. So I think what we're seeing is a really strong correlation that's pretty important to understand. So what about the health system? 46% of Australians now have private health cover at some level. And this is growing. The number of people that have health insurance is growing both in percentage and real terms, but so is our population. So, you know, if we think about the cost of this, the cost burden sits somewhere. And just looking at the demographics, you have to take a step back and say, look, we all seem to be talking about the ageing population, and so much is being said about the ageing population and the cost that is likely to bring, the cost burden on our health system. And that's been discussed for some time. But the data that we've actually just seen really suggests that there's another area that's very, very critical, and that's the young, and especially the lower socioeconomic status and those who are unemployed and underemployed. So these people, so there's this emerging group, not the older people, it's the younger, low socioeconomic and particularly unemployed and underemployed, and these people are typically uninsured. So there's a really interesting conundrum going on. Only 1 in 4 young people are insured and only 1 in 4 in that lowest socioeconomic group are insured. If you drill down further into the data, that means there's a real area of risk among these people who are young, unemployed, low socioeconomic status, and particularly if they live in the country. So we can start to narrow down to these real pockets of pain. And the wellness index in this data now exists at kind of almost any level that you want. You can look at it by Medicare local area, you can look at it by a state or a capital city or a particular suburb or different cohorts of people, or our Helix personas, which I'd love to talk about now, but you'd all kind of would be here all day. But essentially the data now exists, can be drilled down to every level that you want. And all of these medical conditions and illnesses and things that we talked about can be profiled in extraordinary depth. And in fact, we have on our online store simple profiles that you can buy. Give me a profile of people who have chilblains, or give me a profile of people who have this kind of cancer, because the data's now sitting there ready to get started working on. So the Wellness Index and all of those sub-indices and the factors and things we've been talking about really provide regular, timely measures of key health metrics. So it's very timely. We're about to bring out the June data in just the next couple of weeks. It enables us to identify key cohorts of risk. It provides an external benchmark for measuring change against. So, for instance, the Ararat-Grampian community, which was the subject of a major health and fitness campaign, and the location for one of the specials for The Biggest Loser, showed a dramatic improvement in the Alere Wellness Index before and after. And Jeffrey, I think it scaled back after that, didn't it?
Yes.
So what we saw in this massive campaign in this area, particular local area, and The Biggest Loser, I mean, how cool would that be to raise awareness of all of these issues? So a before and after measure showed, yes, improvement was made. Continue measuring, and we saw it fall away. This is the kind of data that's absolutely crucial to understand whether money being spent on various health campaigns and issues is worth doing and is actually sticking. So pretty important stuff. So in summary, the health of the nation can and must be looked at from many perspectives. No one, I think, would argue with the idea that we want Australia to be healthy, happy, fit, and a productive nation. This report really provides data and a framework for understanding that these things are all interrelated. Gary's keep coming up because he knows we're drawing to the end. In conclusion, there are some things like our ageing population we can do very little about. And there are other things like obesity, and I would argue our mental health, that we must do something about. I'd also argue that the correlations between employment and mental health are too compelling to ignore, and that we must do everything we can as a nation to create opportunities for everyone to be fully engaged. And that really means as employed as they're possibly able to be. It's up to us all now. I've said here, I think there are probably 48 PhDs to be done out of this data, and I'm not kidding. You know, when I joined Roy Morgan, I'd come from the university. I had one data set to work on. 942 widowed women had been surveyed, and I had studied that, you know, upside down, inside out. I'd run multiple regressions, factor analysis. I'd done it for all it's worth. Came to Roy Morgan, found a mass of data. And what's needed is the kind of real deep dive understanding into this data. There are just so many issues to be explored. 48 is probably an underestimate. We're really eager for people who can make a difference, either by studying it and understanding it, if they're politicians, getting their policies right. This is something we all need to engage in. Roy Morgan's brought the data to everyone, and the report actually gives you a really good framework. Thank you. Thank you for coming.